Dr. Goodacre, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us today a little bit about an upcoming talk that you're going to be giving. We're not going to be giving away the house today, but a little bit of a teaser here for your participation in the New Insights in the New Testament conference that's coming at the end of September. So Dr. Goodacre, thank you so much for, at the beginning of the school year here, making the time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jordan. Appreciate being on the show.
It's great to have you back. You know, I'm happy to say, nice to see you again. I wish I got to say we got to see you more often, but busy schedules are what they are. I guess if we can just jump directly in to the question at hand, your talk for the New Insights conference is going to be in the quest for the historical Jesus. Your title is The Missing Pieces in the Quest for the Historical Jesus. So can I start by saying, you know, why, with so much that is there that can be picked, why did you want to focus there?
I mean, part of the answer to that is because I'm a contrarian. And so I suppose there's always that part of me that wants to focus on what we haven't got rather than what we have got. But the serious purpose behind it is that it's really about the problem with the way that New Testament scholars treat their evidence. They treat the evidence as if everything really important that we must need to know is there somewhere. We've just got to get the right methods, we've got to find the right sources. All the really important stuff is there. And my thought's always been, well, what if all the really important stuff got lost somewhere along the way? What if even some of the really important stuff got lost? So that's really why I wanted it's about reminding people about the nature of the task, the nature of the quest. Like when we're doing ancient history, it's not like the problem we've got with modern history. With modern history, we've got too many sources.
Right.
You know, I mean, like if you want to write a biography of Obama, you will not get through all the source material. It's impossible. There's reams and reams and reams of it, and there are tons of people to talk to. So you have to be selective. The ancient historian has exactly the opposite problem. We've got nowhere near enough material, and therefore we kind of obsess about the little bit that we do have.
In the nature of this quest, and I guess obsessing on the part we do have, I think for a lot of listeners, they're thinking, well, wait a minute, like we have, I can open up something that tells me about these things. Are you telling me that that's not that much and that this is a small amount of material? Because I think that is a striking claim, as you said, a little bit contrarian maybe, to what people's expectation is to say, well, I can turn to the New Testament, right? Why is that not enough?
Well, I suppose one way of looking at it is, if I were writing a story of your life, Jordan, I would actually want to begin with, where do you come from? What was your upbringing like? Who were the early influences on your life? What were you like as a teenager? This kind of thing. In Jesus's case, okay, we've got his mother's name and his father's name and his brothers and sisters' names, and we know that he's connected with Nazareth, and there are little tiny little shards there. But we don't really know anything about Jesus, the teenager, say. We don't know anything about Jesus's earliest influences. We tend to talk about people like John the Baptist as being Jesus's great influence. Like, you know, he was a John the Baptist disciple. That's how he really got his whole career moving. Maybe they just talked about John the Baptist because he was famous. John the Baptist is really famous. I mean, like, for all we know, like the local rabbi in Nazareth was way more influential on Jesus' upbringing than John the Baptist was. You know, maybe his uncle Zephaniah was like the big person in Jesus' life. The truth is we just don't know. We can't know. That's the problem.
And in this, I guess, in the framing of this too, by saying that we're missing pieces, you're not saying that a historical Jesus doesn't exist. Because I think for some, there's immediately that, well, we don't have it, so that must mean that you're taking the side that there's nothing there. That's not your position in this.
No, right. And obviously I kind of make certain people panic and certain people excited when I talk about this, because like there is the kind of panic of, oh my goodness, he's not going down the mythicist route, is he?
Right.
And then equally there's then, you know, the mythicists are like, ooh, maybe he's like, really all I'm trying to do is saying, let's just face up to what we're doing when we're doing ancient history. I believe very strongly there was a historical Jesus. I shouldn't say believe, because that sounds kind of theological, but I mean, like, as a historian, I believe that Jesus existed as a historical figure. And I think, as one of my teachers, Ed Sanders, said, you can know quite a lot about him compared to lots of other figures. I'll give you an example. We just mentioned John the Baptist. We know way more about Jesus than we know about John the Baptist. Our source material for Jesus is pretty great. There's lots of good stuff. However, that fact that we've got a decent amount of material then blinds us to the really important thing, at least in my perspective here, which is we really are missing so many things that we would like to know. I mean, was Jesus married, for example? It's not a crazy idea that Jesus was married. I know it's kind of on the fringes of scholarship to say he was married to Mary Magdalene, and they had a child and all of that stuff. But we just don't know. I mean, he could easily have had a wife for several years and was widowed in his mid-20s and all the rest of it. We just don't know. I mean, and there isn't any way to know, because our source material is not the nature that it's not giving us that material.
Does the gap there around a topic like that, the question of marriage, is that absence leaving fertile ground for these theories that can go so extremely one way or another, because we have nothing to support it, but also you can't point to anything to say, well, prove me wrong?
I think that's one of the issues. I think when you've got missing pieces, there are a couple of ways you can respond to it. One way of responding to it is just like, as an ancient historian should do, in my opinion, and you go, okay, we have to stop short of saying everything we'd like to say here. Another way of responding to it is to pour into those gaps all sorts of speculative, imaginative stuff. And one of the reasons that I think it's important to reflect on these missing pieces is a kind of an ethical reason, that if you don't think about the missing pieces, you so long for more material that you eventually do pick up on the kind of fringe type stuff. It's like absence of evidence sometimes makes us invent evidence or find fringe theories more plausible than we otherwise would do. I mean, like, just take the marriage thing, just because that's the kind of thing that's in popular culture as well. Was Jesus married? Was he married to Mary Magdalene, and so on? People find all that stuff way more plausible than they should do because of the absence of evidence about Jesus's marital status and his love affairs and all the rest of it. And in the absence, what we should say when there's an absence of evidence is, who knows? But what we actually end up saying is, well, we don't know, and therefore let's find this theory, whether it's Jesus being married to Mary Magdalene or whatever it is, let's find that more attractive. So I think that's the ethical side of it. It's reminding ourselves that, when we don't know stuff, we need to be very careful not to find the more fantastical stuff more plausible than it is.
In the turning to fantastical theories and trying to, I guess, create some ground for them to grow out of, where is it that individuals have turned when they choose not to stop short? But in order to bring anything to that, are they normally in this quest within the missing space, creating things wholesale, or are there pools of materials that they turn to try to fill in some of what's absent?
Right. I think that's one of the issues, which is that the more you focus on the stuff that we have got, the more you are also prone to distort what we've got.
Okay.
So another example, so this sounds terribly negative, but another example, the iguanodon, when that was discovered, or the very first few bones or fossils of the iguanodon that were discovered by Mantell, was actually Gideon Mantell's wife, but he published it in his own name. But when he published this, he had one fossil which was basically the shape of a kind of a pointy shape, and he thought, well, that must be the horn that was on the iguanodon's nose. So when he sketched out the iguanodon, he put the pointy thing on the nose. But then, as the years went on, more and more fossils were discovered of the same dinosaur. It turned out it was the dinosaur's thumb. It was basically, and so as you discovered more pieces, you actually found that you were taking the existing pieces and putting them in the wrong place. So that's one of my issues with not thinking about the missing pieces, is that let's take again John the Baptist, because then we can kind of run with the same sort of theme. Because Matthew's Gospel, Mark's Gospel, Luke's Gospels, John's Gospel all begin Jesus's ministry with John the Baptist, we kind of become obsessed with John the Baptist as a figure. And you'll even see historical Jesus scholars saying, well, one thing we know for certain is that Jesus's ministry began with baptism by John. But we don't know that at all. What we know is Mark's gospel begins that way. Doesn't mean the historical Jesus' ministry began that way. And even if it was relatively early in the historical Jesus' ministry, well, yeah, but I mean, what else happened as well? And I'm sure the reason why people remembered the John the Baptist link is because John the Baptist was famous. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit like, when you look at Stalin's life, people like focused in on Stalin's connections with Lenin because Lenin was more famous than lots of Stalin's bigger influences, So I think that's what you've got there. And it's not to say that we can get some key themes of Jesus's preaching and of Jesus's life. I would be very surprised if kingdom of God, for example, wasn't absolutely key in Jesus's thinking because, it keeps popping up everywhere. And it's in the sort of very fiber of the way that the gospel writers are thinking. But whether you can kind of parse it and nuance it down to the degree that some scholars want to, that's where I'm a little bit concerned.
Can I ask too about the term quest? Because I love your use of that in this because it feels like it so properly encapsulates the task of what you are seeking to do. For someone who maybe has come in and has only heard the mythicist extreme or the other, either side, and that's the version of a quest for a historical Jesus that they know, how do they need to, I guess, reframe that? And where does focusing on the missing pieces help expand that idea and the participation and the value that can come from thinking about these things? I
mean, it is actually a problematic term. I mean, we're stuck with it because of the great book by Schweitzer, The Quest of the Historical Jesus, which actually was the title of the English translation. The German title was called From Reimarus to Vrede, which is about the most boring title you can get. But yeah, this glorious translation by Montgomery, The Quest of the Historical Jesus. And we love that word quest because we think of the quest for the Holy Grail. And, people will even use it. When I was a student, I had some friends that used to talk about their quest for the hottest sauce in their kebab. So we love the idea of like kind of pushing towards this exciting unknown. And actually, the term itself is a little bit misleading because it suggests that if you keep on going with this quest, eventually you will find the solution. You will get to the Holy Grail. You will find the true historical Jesus. So although I use the term because I kind of like it because it makes it sound fun and interesting, it is actually part of the problem, this term quest. It suggests that keep on going, lads, we'll get there, we'll get there, And a lot of time you've got to say, well, hold on a minute, just whoa. Are you really sure that this is going to end with us getting to, the end of the rainbow and finding the pot of gold? It's elusive is the thing.
Yeah, but like the stopping short in the quest, not in the don't pull quest in, but in the stopping short in the missing sources is a much longer title that might feel a lot more German, but probably does get people's interest going a little bit less when they're trying to participate within this. I guess how can we replace quest? Because it does feel like it's so much the thing. If I had to push you to say, well, what would you offer instead? Or for someone coming to your talk, where might they leave with their understanding of this instead of quest, if something can take its place?
I think if I was wanting to be really radical and, I could be talked into this, I would want to say, let's just focus on what we know for certain, which is that we've got some pretty great early source material that tells us some things about Jesus. So, we've got these 4 canonical gospels. We've got a bunch of fascinating non-canonical materials. We've got Paul's letters. So part of me wants to say, let's just think about those. And when we've actually got those clearer in our heads, maybe then we should reflect on historical Jesus. And to illustrate the point, I used to teach a course for many years at Duke on the historical Jesus. It was one of my regular offerings. About 5 years ago, I thought, why is it my least popular course? Like when I talked to students who had done multiple courses with me, they always said that was their least favorite. And I was like, why is it? And eventually I realized is that it took you so long to get to the point where you were actually talking about Jesus that it felt like, I'd sold them a lie, because to get to talking about Jesus, you've got to understand methods, you've got to understand source material, you've got to understand background and context. So you spend weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks looking at archaeology and all the stuff which I think is fascinating. And you look at the source material and you look at methods in the quest and criteria and all this. And you get to Thanksgiving break and it's, Professor, are we ever going to talk about Jesus? And I realized then that the problem, I don't think is me. I think the problem is the nature of the quest, and that actually what we should be doing, instead of leaping straight into historical Jesus studies, sometimes we should just spend a bit more time looking at the materials that we do have. Looking at the gospel material. And I'm an obsessed source critic. I love source criticism. So I actually do want to say, what were Luke's sources? What were Matthew's sources? And so on. Was Mark the first gospel? Was there a Q and all of that? But to me, so much of that is much more tangible. That's the thing. And so I don't teach historical Jesus to undergrads anymore. I actually relabel the course Jesus and the Gospels. Keep Jesus in there because it's about Jesus, but put the Gospels in there so that I tell them up front, we are learning about Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Thomas, Proto-Evangelium of James, as well as eventually getting to Jesus. And actually, it's been much more successful in that format. So I suppose that's my long-winded answer to your question, that maybe we just don't need to keep focusing on the historical Jesus. There's tons and tons of books out about it already. I will never read all of the books on the historical Jesus in my lifetime, even if I, read nothing else. So there's already plenty of those.
Well, if you are daunted by some of the amount of books, like Dr. Goodacre just mentioned, that exist, and interested in turning towards something different, the end of September, you can come and join Dr. Goodacre in his talk on the missing pieces in the quest, or maybe a much longer version of that title by when we get there, for the historical Jesus. It's the New Insights in the New Testament Conference, end of September. Dr. Goodacre, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to come and talk with us a little bit about this. I really appreciate it. It is one of these topics that is everywhere all the time, but just becomes a thing that becomes so misunderstood, I think, because it feels like it's everywhere. So thank you for your insight today, and I look forward to hearing more from you about this in the future.
It's a great pleasure. Thanks for having me on.